Okay, so the nation's top intelligence official just told the United States Senate under oath on camera that it is not the intelligence community's job to determine what is and is not an imminent threat. That's the Director of National Intelligence at the Worldwide Threats hearing, saying threat assessment isn't her job. Let that sit for a second. And that's not even the wildest part, because in the same hearing, Senator Ossoff holds up a printed fundraising email from the president's own PAC, offering donors private national security briefings, using a photo of flag-draped coffins of soldiers killed in Iran, and when he shows it to Gabbard on camera, she says she's never seen it. The CIA director says it never happened. Email is public. It's on the internet right now. And then Ossoff gets to the Fulton County raid and Gabbard admits, yeah, the president asked me to go the day of to oversee a domestic FBI raid on an elections office. The Director of National Intelligence, whose entire job is foreign threats, standing inside an FBI evidence truck in Georgia. This clip is about 7 minutes. It's Ossoff going through all three of these back-to-back: the fundraising email, the Iran lie, and the election raid. Watch Gabbard's face every time she can't answer. Watch how Cotton cuts Ossoff off right when it gets good. And if you're not subscribed, now's the time, because the breakdown after this is where it all clicks. Let's get into it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. And before I ask you a few questions, I want to call everyone's attention again to this fundraising email signed by the president that Senator Kelly mentioned earlier, in which the President of the United States invites his campaign donors to, quote, claim your spot, join now to receive private national security briefings to his political donors, featuring a photo of the president at a dignified transfer ceremony with a flag-draped coffin of an American service member killed in action returning to their family. And the American people need to know that the President of the United States is fundraising for his political campaign and his PAC using images of American service members killed in action, and it's a disgrace. Now, Director Gabbard, I'd like to reground this in your core responsibilities. Under the law, you are responsible for providing national intelligence to the president, correct?
Yes.
And to the heads of executive branch departments and agencies, yes?
Yes.
And to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and senior military commanders?
Across the IC, yes.
And to the Senate and the House and relevant committees, correct?
Yes.
And the law states that the national intelligence you provide to Congress, quote, should be timely, objective, and independent of political considerations, correct?
Yes.
And you noted in your opening statement you're here fulfilling a statutory responsibility and that your testimony, quote, represents the IC's assessment of threats,
That's right.
Correct? That opening statement, as submitted to the committee in advance of this hearing, stated that as a result of last summer's airstrikes, quote, Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated, end quote, correct?
That's right.
And is that in fact the assessment of the intelligence community?
Yes.
So the assessment of the intelligence community is that Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated by last summer's airstrikes.
Yes.
And the opening statement you submitted to the committee last night also stated, quote, there has been no effort since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability, end quote, correct?
That's right.
And that's the assessment of the intelligence community.
Yes.
The White House stated on March 1st of this year that this war was launched and was, quote, a military campaign to eliminate the imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, end quote. That's a statement from the White House. Quote, the imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime. Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was an imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime?
The intelligence community assessed that Iran maintained the intention to rebuild and to continue to grow their nuclear enrichment capability.
Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, yes or no?
Senator, the only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president.
False.
And
this is the
determination.
worldwide threats hearing where you present to Congress national intelligence, timely, objective, and independent of political considerations. You've stated today that the intelligence community's assessment is that Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated and that, quote, there had been no efforts since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. Was it the intelligence community's assessment that nevertheless, despite this obliteration, there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime? Yes or no?
It is not the intelligence community's responsibility to determine what is and is not an imminent threat.
Okay.
That is up to the
Here's the
president
problem.
based on a volume
No,
of
it is
information
precisely
that he receives.
it is precisely your responsibility to determine what constitutes a threat to the United States. This is the worldwide threats hearing, where, as you noted in your opening testimony, quote, you represent the IC's assessment of threats. You are here to represent the IC's assessment of threats. That's a quote from your own opening statement. And so my question is, as you're here to present the IC's assessment of threats, was it the assessment of the intelligence community that, as the White House claimed on March 1st, there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime? Yes or no?
Once again, Senator, the intelligence community has provided the inputs that make up this annual threat assessment.
You won't answer the
It is
question.
the nature of the imminent threat that the president has to make that determination based on a collection and volume
You're here
of
to be
information and
timely.
intelligence that he is provided with.
You're here to be timely, objective, and independent of political considerations.
Exactly what I'm doing.
No, you're evading a question because to provide a candid response to the committee would contradict a statement from the White House. Let me ask you about your presence in Fulton County on January 28th of this year. You were present at the FBI's raid on the Fulton County Elections Office on January 28th, correct?
I was present for part of the FBI exercising a warrant approved by a municipal judge.
Yes,
to
and the
obtain
FBI was there executing,
investigation.
that warrant to seize ballots and materials associated with the 2020 election, correct?
Yes.
And are you aware that members of this committee have already opened inquiries into your election-related activities?
Yes.
And are you aware that your general counsel and deputy general counsel have already provided testimony to this committee regarding those activities?
Yes.
On February 2nd, you sent a letter to Senator Warner regarding your presence at the raid. Was that letter accurate?
I don't recall the exact date, but if I sent a letter that had my signature, it was accurate.
You stated in the letter that your presence at the raid was, quote, requested by the president, correct?
Yes.
When did the president request your presence at the raid?
The day of the raid, the warrant execution commencing.
The day of the raid.
Yes.
He called you on the phone?
I'm not going to disclose how the message was delivered, but it was a request from the president and his administration to go and help oversee this warrant being executed along with the deputy director of the FBI.
Is it your role
and
to
thank
oversee?
the FBI agents who were conducting
Is it
this
your
warrant.
role to oversee the execution of criminal warrants?
It is my role, based on statute that Congress has passed, to have oversight over election security, to include counterintelligence.
But you said you oversaw the raid, correct? You just testified you oversaw the raid?
Portions of it.
Okay. Did you handle any ballots or election-related materials?
No.
You were inside an FBI evidence truck, correct? You were photographed inside an FBI evidence truck.
It was an empty truck, yes.
The president stated, quote, you looked at
Senator's time has
votes that
expired.
wanted to be checked out.
The
Is that
senator's
accurate?
time is expired.
Did you look at votes as the president
Senator
stated?
Ossoff, your time has expired.
You respond
can
for the
have
record?
her. No, she cannot respond
No,
because
for the record, will the director please respond for the record to that question is my
I'm happy
question.
to respond to questions for the record.
All right, so let's talk about what you just watched. Because there are 3 separate things happening in that clip, and every single one of them on its own would be a scandal in any normal administration. But stacked together like this, in one hearing from one senator's questioning, it paints a picture that is really hard to look away from. Let's start with the fundraising email, because this one is actually insane when you see the details. So here's what we know. On March 12th, Trump's PAC, Never Surrender Inc., sends out a fundraising email offering donors something called a National Security Briefing membership. The email says, and I'm paraphrasing here, claim your spot, receive private national security briefings, unfiltered updates on threats facing America, direct from the president. And the image they used? Trump saluting at a dignified transfer ceremony at Dover Air Force Base for 6 soldiers killed in the Iran war. Flag-draped coffins, used to sell donor memberships. Senator Andy Kim responded, quote, I hope the donor's national security briefing doesn't skip the Iran will close the Strait of Hormuz section that Trump and Hegseth missed. And here's where it gets genuinely unbelievable. Ossoff holds the printed email up in the hearing, shows it directly to Gabbard and Ratcliffe, the CIA director, says under oath, "I don't know what that document is, but regardless of what it says, it didn't happen." So either the president's PAC is scamming donors with fake promises of access, or the CIA director is lying to the Senate. Those are your two options. Neither one is good. It's C. Now here's the Iran piece, because this is where Gabbard's testimony completely contradicts the White House. In her own written statement to the committee, she said Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated by last summer's strikes, and that there had been no efforts to rebuild. No efforts. That's her own submission. But on March 1st, the White House launched Operation Epic Fury specifically to, quote, eliminate the imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime. So which is it? Was the threat obliterated, or was it imminent? Because it cannot be both. And when Ossoff asks her directly yes or no, did the intelligence community assess that Iran posed an imminent nuclear threat, she won't answer. She just keeps repeating. The only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president. The director of national intelligence at the Worldwide Threats hearing is saying that assessing threats is not her job. Think about that for a second, and intelligence experts are sounding the alarm on this. Former directors of national intelligence have said publicly that this fundamentally undermines the entire purpose of the IC. The intelligence community exists specifically to provide objective, non-political assessments to policymakers. That's the job. That's the whole job. If the DNI is just deferring to the White House on what counts as a threat, then she's not an intelligence director. She's a political shield. She's giving the president cover to justify military action without the intelligence to back it up. And this matters because Joe Kent, Trump's own director of the National Counterterrorism Center, resigned the day before this hearing. His reason? He said publicly that Iran posed no imminent threat and that the war was driven by pressure from Israel. That's not some Democratic senator saying that. That's Trump's own counterterrorism chief walking out the door over it. 7 U.S. troops have been killed, over 200 wounded, and the person responsible for telling Congress whether the intelligence supported the war just told them it's not her call. Now let's get to Fulton County, because this is the part that should alarm everyone regardless of party. On January 28th, the FBI raided the Fulton County Elections Office in Georgia, seizing ballots, tabulator tapes, and voter rolls from the 2020 election. And Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, whose jurisdiction is strictly limited to foreign intelligence, was physically there. She was photographed standing inside an FBI evidence truck. Her job has nothing to do with domestic law enforcement. Nothing. She oversees foreign threats. That's the statute. And when Ossoff presses her on it, she admits the president asked her to go. The day of. Same day. She says she was there to observe and to ensure election integrity. But under the National Security Act, the DNI is explicitly prohibited from engaging in domestic law enforcement or internal security functions. She has no authority to oversee a criminal warrant execution. None. And when Ossoff asks if she handled ballots, she says no but admits she was inside the evidence truck. She claims it was empty. That's her defense. The truck was empty, and legal scholars are not buying it. Constitutional law experts are calling this a dangerous precedent. Bipartisan members of the Senate Judiciary Committee are calling for a formal inquiry into whether Gabbard violated federal statutes separating intelligence agencies from domestic police work, because if the president can send the nation's top spy chief to personally oversee an FBI raid on a local elections office tied to his own 2020 grievances, what exactly is the limiting principle? What stops him from doing it in 2026? And here's the thing Ossoff almost got to before Cotton cut him off. Trump himself said publicly that Gabbard looked at votes he wanted checked out. That's a direct quote from the president. And when Ossoff tries to ask Gabbard if that's accurate, Cotton kills his time, won't let her answer. The chairman of the Intelligence Committee shut down the question about whether the DNI looked at ballots on the president's orders. You cannot make this up. And watchdog groups are now filing complaints with the Federal Election Commission over the National Security Briefings email. Because here's the legal issue. If government resources or personnel were used to facilitate donor briefings involving classified or sensitive information, that's not just an ethics violation. That could trigger a DOJ investigation into bribery and campaign finance fraud. The Hatch Act specifically bars federal employees from using their positions for political benefit. Ratcliffe cited the Hatch Act himself as proof it didn't happen. But the email exists. It's public. It promised exactly that. So let me put this all together for you. In one 7-minute clip, you watch the nation's top intelligence official refuse to confirm whether the intelligence supported the president's war, admit she showed up to a domestic FBI raid on the president's personal orders, and claim she'd never seen a fundraising email that the entire country has already read. That's not testimony. That's damage control. That's someone whose job is to brief Congress on threats, choosing instead to protect the president from his own contradictions. And by the way, the Senate Intelligence Committee is now weighing subpoenas to get the internal memos and communications between Gabbard's office and the White House in the days leading up to the Iran strikes, because Congress was kept in the dark. Lawmakers say they were potentially misled about Iran's capabilities. The IC previously assessed Iran's nuclear program as obliterated, and yet somehow we're 3 weeks into a war to stop an imminent threat that the intelligence community apparently never confirmed was imminent. So here's the line. If someone brings this up, here's what you tell them. The DNI said threat assessment isn't her job. Her own written testimony says Iran's nuclear program was obliterated. The president launched a war over an imminent threat that his own counterterrorism director resigned over because it wasn't real. And the nation's top intelligence official was standing inside an FBI evidence truck at a domestic election raid because the president told her to go. That's not intelligence oversight, that's obedience. And there is a massive difference. That's it. Like, subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one.